Joining me now is Jeffrey Kroeker, principal with Massey Advisory, a government relations, global risk, and business diplomacy advisory firm. He's also a commercial law partner with Massey LLP and practices within the defense industry. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Day 3 of the NATO summit. What are the biggest takeaways you're seeing so far?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to start seriously considering as Canadians that our friends and allies are losing patience or have lost patience with us when it comes to our lackluster military spending and support for our armed forces. It is palpable, the anger, the frustration that exists behind the scenes. And now what's starting to happen is our allies are beginning to think, let's start linking other things with Canada's military spending and putting trade and other relationships potentially on the table.
With what was unveiled today by Trudeau, is that enough? Will that appease anybody?
Well, look, the 2% number is always meant to be a floor, not a ceiling. So it's sort of typical of the mindset of the current government, which is a shooting for bronze mentality of trying to catch up too late, too little, too late. And in this particular case, it's great that we have a path forward, but again, it's 8 years to get to that point. And there are things that we could be doing right now to spend money, to bring those numbers up, to support our armed forces, and to equip our men and women in uniform with the best equipment as fast as possible. But we're not doing that. And I think we have to start realizing that this is not a tomorrow problem. This is a yesterday problem, and it needs resolution now.
Where do you think money could be spent now to make that difference, and where would the money come from?
Well, look, the government itself has certainly increased its spending quite a bit, but not on defense. And while it claims that the rates of defense spending have gone up, it's true in dollar terms in the budget. But when it comes to dollars flowing out the door, it's a totally different thing. It's one thing to budget the money, it's another thing to spend it. And we know every year the Department of Defense returns money to the Treasury that's unspent. And part of this comes by buying equipment off the shelf and stopping this process of Canadian customization that we always tend to do. Another way to do it would be to give our men and women in uniform a raise, which would help in fulfilling the recruitment needs of the armed forces, to recognize that there is a shortage of men and women in uniform and that we need more of them. And then, of course, the other big thing would be is to start rolling out things like over-the-horizon radar in the Arctic and actually getting our ships built that we signed agreements on 17 years ago that we still don't have floating yet in the ocean. And
what has happened with them? Why have we not built them in 17 years?
Look, this is an age-old problem with Canadian procurement. With the military and typically our industrial offset program, which, without getting technical, I sort of often joke and say we don't have military procurement in Canada, but we have a jobs program that from time to time buys stuff for the military. We have to start looking at what our allies and our partners are doing. We don't have to have the capability or capacity to build everything in the country, and we have to start looking at buying things off the shelf. And we have to start looking at replacing things. And we also have to start looking at what it is that our Army needs in particular, in the sense of new equipment that we could buy quickly, and asking our NATO partners who have their own industrial complexes and tapping into our own military industrial complex in Canada to equip our forces with the best equipment as fast as possible.
And just one last question before we go. Let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden. Has this news conference coming up a little later on. How important is this performance by him?
I've certainly had a number of conversations with folks in and around Congress in the last few days. And with that, I will tell you, a lot of eyes are on this particular news conference to see how he behaves and how he acts. And of course, I think even our friends and allies in NATO, everyone's paying attention. It is a discussion point behind the scenes. Really, the focus has been a big thing now vis-a-vis Canada. Here has been the frustration towards Canada and its NATO spending, and that has sometimes even eclipsed that conversation about Biden.
Okay. Jeffrey, thank you very much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.